What is the difference between sprinters and marathon runners? Usain Bolt, the 100 and 200 metre world record holder. Mo Farah, 10-time world and Olympic gold medal winner who recently won the Chicago Marathon. They are both runners, but what is the difference between the two types of athlete? The most obvious difference is one runs for 10 to 20 seconds at very high speeds, while the other runs for over 2 hours at relatively lower speeds. These events are the two extremes of running and demand different physiological characteristics to reach elite level. Sprinters have larger muscles than marathon runners, as they need to be able to accelerate fast at the start of the race through producing high amounts of power. This requires strong arm, core and leg muscles. They build up their muscles by lifting weights. Marathon runners do not have such large muscles, as having large amounts of muscle mass will require a marathon runner to carry the extra mass, which would require more energy. This would result in the marathon runner being low in energy and fatiguing. The skeletal muscle is composed of muscle fibers, which are made up of repeating units called sarcomeres. Within each sarcomere are two filaments, actin and myosin. When actin and myosin overlap, this causes the sarcomere to shorten, causing muscle contraction. This requires adenosine triphosphate, also known as ATP. When the sarcomere lengthens by actin and myosin sliding apart, this causes muscle relaxation. This also requires ATP. When this occurs repeatedly, it results in movement. Muscle fiber types vary, with some being fast-twitch fibers, which are called type 2 fibers, and others being slow-twitch, or type 1 fibers. In a sprinter's muscle, there's a higher proportion of fast-twitch fibers than slow-twitch. Fast-twitch muscle fibers are bigger than slow-twitch muscle fibers, which contributes to the bigger muscles of sprinters and smaller of marathon runners. In a marathon runner's muscle, there's a higher proportion of slow-twitch muscle fibers than fast-twitch. Sprinters use fast-twitch fibers, as these fibers provide high explosive power, which allows sprinters to accelerate rapidly at the start of the race and to get to high top speed. These fibers also fatigue fast. Marathon runners use slow-twitch muscle fibers when they are running. These fibers contract slower than fast-twitch and have a very high endurance, making them well suited to running for long periods of time. Muscle contraction requires ATP. The problem is, only about 2 seconds worth of ATP is stored in the muscle, so it needs to be resynthesized while running in order for muscle contraction to occur. There's multiple energy systems used to replace the ATP. The fastest way you can resynthesize ATP is through phosphocreatine and anaerobic glycolysis. The resynthesis of ATP through carbohydrate oxidation and fat oxidation is considerably slower. Phosphocreatine provides ATP through the phosphate from the phosphocreatine binding with ADP to form ATP. Anaerobic glycolysis is where ATP is produced without oxygen. In glycolysis, glucose is converted into pyruvate, which releases ATP. Sprinters need ATP at a fast rate. Therefore, as the ATP store in the muscles is rapidly available and you can resynthesize ATP the fastest through phosphocreatine and anaerobic glycolysis, sprinters predominantly use these stores. The problem is, these stores are very limited. Phosphocreatine and anaerobic glycolysis stores can only provide a very small amount of ATP in comparison to carbohydrate and fat oxidation stores. Phosphocreatine only lasts 10 to 15 seconds before being depleted, so for long distance running, this provides a very limited capacity. Anaerobic stores will only last about a 400-metre race before getting a burning sensation in the muscle, which is due to the byproducts of anaerobic glycolysis slowing down the process and causing fatigue. A marathon is more than 100 times as long as a 400-metre race, so other energy sources have to be used to provide the high amounts of energy required to run a marathon. Therefore, marathon runners use mainly carbohydrate oxidation and fat oxidation, as these stores can provide high amounts of ATP. They oxidize these stores through aerobic respiration, which is where carbohydrates or fats are oxidized to produce ATP to fuel the muscle. Aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria. The oxygen required for aerobic respiration is breathed in from the air into the lungs. The oxygen then diffuses into the blood and is pumped out by the heart and transported to the muscle, where the oxygen diffuses from the blood into the mitochondria in the muscle where aerobic respiration occurs. Marathon runners use carbohydrates through the glycogen stores in their muscles and glucose that is in the blood to provide ATP. They also use fat stored as triglyceride stores in the muscle and in adipose tissue. They adapt to readily utilize fat to produce ATP, and they also consume carbohydrates during the race. This allows them to conserve their glycogen stores so they can maintain a high and constant running speed during the race and prevent early onset of fatigue, which correlates with the depletion of glycogen stores. Sprinters will have adapted to have higher levels of enzymes for glycolysis in their fast-twitch muscle fibers than marathon runners, making them well suited to using glycolysis to resynthesize ATP for muscle contraction. They will also adapt to resynthesize ATP from phosphocreatine at a faster rate. These adaptations will result in sprinters' fast-twitch muscle fibers having a high anaerobic capacity. Marathon runners have higher concentrations of mitochondria in their slow-twitch muscle fibers than sprinters do. This helps to facilitate aerobic metabolism, resulting in marathon runners having a high aerobic capacity. Marathon runners' cardiovascular system adapts due to the endurance training. They have high stroke volumes, which means a high volume of blood is pumped out of their heart with every beat. This increase in stroke volume is due to the chronic adaptation of an increase in left ventricle cavity diameter and wall thickness in the heart. This is a result of hours and hours of endurance training. It allows for a high volume of blood to reach the muscle. They also adapt to have an increased number of capillaries surrounding their muscles to maximize the amount of oxygen getting into the muscle to be used for ATP production. These adaptations of the cardiovascular system result in fast transport of oxygen and removal of waste products produced in respiration, and contribute to the high aerobic capacity of marathon runners. Sprinters also have these cardiovascular adaptations, but not to the same extent as marathon runners due to the anaerobic nature of a sprint. In summary, there are differences between the physiology of sprinters and marathon runners due to the difference in the two events. Sprinters have larger muscles than marathon runners, as they require high power to run at top speeds. Sprinters have a high proportion of fast-twitch fibers, which are fast contracting but also fast fatiguing. Marathon runners have a higher proportion of slow-twitch fibers, which are slow contracting but slow fatiguing. Sprinters use mainly their ATP stores and phosphocreatine and anaerobic glycolysis to produce ATP, whereas marathon runners predominantly oxidize fat or carbohydrates to produce ATP. Sprinters have a high anaerobic capacity as their fast-twitch fibers are well adapted for this, whereas marathon runners have a high aerobic capacity, which is due to increased mitochondria in their slow-twitch fibres as well as cardiovascular adaptations. So these are the differences between sprinters and marathon runners. I hope you enjoyed the video.